man. I am so on fire. You guys can have a seat right now. You know, one thing that we don't really understand about man is how absolutely glorious we are. Say, I'm glorious. I'm glorious. I think all too many times we forget how absolutely glorious we were created to be. It's interesting because when we were talking last night, right before I got up on stage, we were doing our entering into worship, right? And we realized a very important thing. We realized that God breathed his life into us, right? And because of that, we can honestly say that we have a piece of God in us. And then today, to further that, we have the bishop who's sitting there telling us that deep inside our nonsense and our clutter, there is this undying truth that is deep within that we just kind of got to excavate through. And that's that breath of God. So that means that you and I literally stole the breath of God. That means that out of all creation, we took God's breath away. Have you ever heard that term? We normally hear it when a guy and a girl meet, right? Oh man, she took my breath away. Now, yeah, because she punched you in the gut. Because you're trying to spit some game that was weak, you know what I'm saying? Yo, girl, what up? She took my breath away. But this is different. We literally, of all creation, we are the only of God's creation that literally has his breath. We literally took his breath away. So yes, you and I are super glorious. I'm hyped about manhood, not in a very macho way. I'm hyped about manhood, not in a way that we're pounding our chest and I'm gonna run down the streets of Queens and just punching people in the face because they don't know Jesus. You don't know Jesus? Pow! Find him! No, that'll get you locked up. Don't do that. I'm hyped about being man because of how glorious the call is. There's a responsibility behind being man. Now, I know you guys have been to guys' talks before, and most of the time you end up leaving feeling mad guilty about being man. You're oh, gosh, we suck. The world would be such a better place if we just weren't so horrible. True. But I'm not going to beat that down because you already know it. I want to tap into the part that you guys don't know, the part that has been kind of built up in your head, the part that's been buried and left to kind of rot. And that's that part that you are extremely glorious. We learned about the holy curiosity and the unholy curiosity of our boy, David, right? But I want to backtrack. I want you guys to know David for who David was before he was tempted. I want you guys to know who David was as a man after God's heart. So I want to kind of tell the story of David, and I want to bring it to life, because how many of us have been to Sunday school? Everybody. And we've all been to Sunday school where in some way, shape, or form, you were presented the story of David in its very coloring book. You know, it's like David, the shepherd, he's holding a pretty little sheep. And they're like, hey, here's Goliath. Can you fight him? And he's like, well, I don't know. I have these sheep to take care of. But if you knew the story of David, you'd realize that this dude is beast. This dude is absolutely beast. And it's so cool to see how he works and how he functions. I want to talk about David in a way that you've never really seen David. I want you guys to know him and kind of relate to him a little bit. And the way that I want to do that is simply just letting you guys know how absolutely glorious we are. Did that advance? Oh, praise God. I don't see it here, but I'm going to work with it there. I want you guys to know how absolutely glorious he is and how glorious you guys are. And I'm going to meet you on your level. Forget the stage for a second, because you and I, for a second, cameraman, you're going to hate me. I'm sorry, bro. But I want you to see this picture, and I want you guys to realize that this is kind of like this very cartoon-esque way that we envision David. Just like this kid, you know, who's trying to prove something and so on and so forth. Very, very attitude, just kind of chip on his shoulder. He has to prove to his brothers that he's greater than them. That's not who David is. So let me tell the story. David. And you guys can probably relate to this, right? Because I have two older brothers, right? And one of my brothers is super athletic. The other brother is super artistic, you know? And then there's just me. You know what I mean? And I always kind of looked up to my brothers, and I wanted to kind of be who they were, you know? But I couldn't pick and choose, and I couldn't find a sport that involved dance, you know what I mean? I was like, well, man, I don't know. I mean, I can go on the football field and, like, dance, but I'm probably gonna die, you know? I couldn't find anything like that. I always felt like the guy who was left out. David was that dude. Everybody looked to his brothers as his brothers were the answer, the solution, and so on and so forth. But when it came down to battle, there's this giant that made his way through. And this giant basically was disrespecting the God that they worship. This giant was basically disrespecting their family line, their blood. This giant's basically saying, listen, I will destroy you and everyone that you know. If you lose to me, you guys will be mine officially. They were like, who are you going to pick? Who are you going to pick? And amongst all these soldiers comes David. David was a glorified peanuts and hot dogs guy in battle. You know, his father was like, hey, go bring them cheese and bread. They've been fighting. You just go take care of them. So David's kind of walking into battle. Got your cheese here. Cheese and bread, cheese and bread. And he walks in and he's just kind of like, hey, what's going on? Wow, why is that mountain moving? You ever been that younger brother who's just curious as to what's going on? Hey, what's going on? Hey, what did he say? He said he's going to kill us all. Whoa. Me too? Yeah, probably. What? How? He said something about ripping heads off. Oh. Not I, says David. And when we think of this story, we kind of envision, because we've already created this cartoon image of who David is, and we kind of envision David doing the, all right, everybody, you guys go ahead and fight your little war. I'm going to take care of my sheepy sheep. He wasn't backing up. He was actually moving forward. He was actually moving forward. I'm going to give you guys a few occupations, and you tell me if, in your mind, you think they're weak or they're strong, okay? A blacksmith. Strong. Let's see, let me think of it. A fisherman. A shepherd. Really? Y'all thought a shepherd is strong? He takes care of sheep. I mean, you have a blacksmith who's pounding out metal. You have fishermen who are fighting sharks. Not really. That's just Michael Phelps. But when people normally think about a shepherd, they normally just associate the shepherd with someone who's weak. They don't think that the job really takes much. You just watch some sheep. That's why sometimes we don't relate to that story of the Good Shepherd, Jesus and the Good Shepherd. We just kind of think that like when we're broken, Jesus just carries us, you know? But I was told that the application process for a shepherd is absolutely insane. It's not what you would think. It's not like this resume based on paper, right? It isn't this simple resume like how many sheep they've tended, how big was the yard in which the sheep took care, how much grass did they graze? No. You know how they would hire a shepherd? They would check for scars. The more scars a shepherd had, the more likely that he was a good shepherd. And why is that the case? Because it meant that the shepherd went to war for his sheep. You ever think of that? When Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, I am the gate. I am the gate. You know what that means? It literally means that he's laying down his life for his sheep. It means that anything that comes out or comes in has to go through the shepherd. Did that change your perspective of David as shepherd a little bit? I'm going to change it a little bit more. This is an awesome image of David. When David says, let me fight Goliath, he says this: your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off the sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. Hold up. You talking, let me go back for a second. We talking this dude? This dude right here, when a sheep was taken by either that thing or that thing, that he would run after it, engage it to make sure that he got the sheep back. Kind of changes your perspective of David a little bit, right? It says, hold up, I'll fight Goliath. I'll fight Goliath. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God, the Lord who rescued me from the hand of the Philistines. The Lord who rescued me. What he's saying here is the same Lord who intervened on his behalf when he was going after the lion and the bear is the same Lord that's going to intervene when he goes to battle against Goliath. See, we're not talking about just this skinny dude. We're talking about a dude who found the definition of his masculinity and his purpose because of his full reliance on God. He found his purpose and his masculinity because he found that he relied on God. See, in our world today, we can't rely on God. The world tells us we can't rely on God. If you're going to be man, you be man. Because if you rely on God, you're just relying on a crutch. See, God ain't going to put food on the table, but you are. God ain't going to protect your family, but you are. God's invisible, untouchable. You can't see him, but they can see you. The problem is that the world has made God our enemy. In order for us to be masculine, we must take God out of the equation because true masculinity in today's standards doesn't have God in it. But man, are they wrong. Sometimes what we see isn't necessarily what we get. See, we see a world's definition of true manhood and we just assume that that's what man is. We try to fit this mold that wasn't created for us. There are elements within that mold that, yes, are a necessity for life. There are parts of the mold that do make sense. However, they're not the full truth. The definition of a heresy is something that waters down or dilutes the truth. It manipulates the truth. The world takes manhood and it manipulates it to this new form of manhood that was never intended to be true man. It's just man. It's not true. And we kind of bit into it. I bit into it growing up. But David wanted to crush that. David wanted to let everyone know that the armor that you wear, the type of soldier that you are, that's good for you, but that's not true soldier. That's not true armor. My armor comes in the fact that I fully rely on God. This is how we up our game. This is how you and I become elevated, when we come to this recognition as David did. David's armor was not the armor of the world. In fact, the general in the army, the king, when he finally said, fine, David, you can fight the war, he started giving him armor. He gave him armor that was a norm in battle. He gave him the armor that was used regularly in battle. The armor that he knew could defend him in battle. He goes, here's your helmet. Here's your breastplate. Here, cover your legs. Here's a spear. Here's my sword. And David put all of that on, and he looked and goes, but this ain't my armor. This is not what I used against the lions and the bears. Goliath even gloats about his armor. He was like, look at my armor, bro. Check it out. It shines and it's heavy. And David's not amused by it, nor entertained by it, not even threatened by it. His armor was not the armor that we had. If we were looking at this by MMA standards, and they were setting up Goliath and David, and right before the fight begins, it shows you their fighting style. Well, David's fighting style was humility and faith. And Goliath is just brute strength. Remember, when we think of certain fields of work, we assume strength and weakness on either one. When you see Goliath and you presume this mountain of a man with this armor and this sword and this shield and all this stuff, and he's ready to go to battle, and then you see David, at first glance, you're saying David is dead. So I'm part of this gym, and it's a mixed martial arts gym. And I've been taking Muay Thai and doing, a lot of cool things that I'm not extremely good at yet, but I'm working at it, right? And I walked into class, and there was this new guy that was there, man. This dude was beast. I mean, this dude had muscles on top of muscles, you know what I mean? Like, he can probably, like do this to his pinky, and they'd be like a muscle, a defined muscle. His legs were like tree trunks, man. When he hit the bag, it was like thunder. I thought there was a storm outside. Bow. I'm like, what? I want that. Like, I just wanted to drink a protein shake and do push-ups, you know what I mean? Like, I saw Homeboy, and I'm like, oh, that's cool, I want that. And then he'd hit the bag, and it'd be thunderous. It'd be so powerful. And then when class started, he made his way into our Muay Thai class. And I started praying. I'm like, Lord, please don't pair him up with me, Lord. There's this girl over here. You can pair me up with her. But don't pair me up with this moving skyscraper. Please, Lord. And as coach is pairing people off, he's like, you with you. You with you. Oscar with that. I go, come on! And then I realized the words came out. I'm like, oh, my bad. Sorry, coach. And we start going, right? And he's like, we're doing a sparring session, and he's in front of me, and I'm talking to him like this. I'm like, hey, bro, I heard you kicking over there. Wow, He's like, yeah, I'll take it easy on you. I'm like, yeah, please do, right? And we start going at it, and he gets in his stance, and I get in my stance. And that's when I realized that what I thought I saw, I didn't see. I got in my stance. So I'm like this. I'm rocking. And he gets in his stance like this. I'm going to show you guys again. I'll go up here. Anyone who, you know what I'm talking about the minute you see it. So I get in my fighting stance. I'm like this, right? And he gets in his fighting stance. He's like this. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun. So I asked him a question, because I always ask a question when we start sparring. I go, hey, how many times have you been doing this? He goes, it's my first day. Oh, this is going to be real fun. But as we started sparring and doing our thing, I realized that, like, what I was intimidated by, what I wanted my world to be like, was not necessarily what I saw. What I saw is what the world defined. Homeboy was an awesome dude, but after about a minute of a 5-minute round, he was done. Hands were dropping, fatigued, mouth open, deep breaths, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, I got 2 more rounds, bro. And it felt good, but at the same time, it opened my eyes to the reality of how fast we bite into what we see. David did not need the armor of the world. Rather, he needed the armor that he knew worked. And that was his reliance and his faith on God. He knew that worked because there was not one bear, not one lion. There was not one sheep unattended. He knew it worked. This is how he upped his game. This is how it became a reality to him. He's sitting there with his Goliath at hand. Now, when we think of how this actually works out, we know the story. What were the weapons that he had at hand? Sling, rocks, his staff. Actually, he shows up, right? He shows up to war with his little pouch of rocks, his sling, his staff. He shows up and Goliath makes fun of him. It was the early world's equivalent of, what are those? He got at him. He started making fun of him. He goes, bro, you come at me with like sticks and slings and rocks like I'm some sort of dog, bro? You coming at me like that? And David's response is like absolutely like insane. The confidence that he has because of the God who dwells within him. His response is like, yo, but I'm gonna kill you with this stuff. I don't think you realize who you're facing. You're facing David, the faithful servant of God. Like, do you realize who you're up against? Like, this is David's response, and he's not saying it out of cockiness. He's saying it because he knows that his faith makes him glorious. He knows this because his faith makes him glorious. So he's not doing it with cockiness. He's doing it with complete and utter confidence that the God who saved him from the mouth of the lion and the bear is the same God who's going to save him from Goliath. Goliath goes on and he says something like this. He goes, this is what he said before, right? I come against you in the name of the Lord. This is David. Almighty, the God of armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Okay, I'm going to come back to this because I want to highlight something. But Goliath goes at David and he basically says how he's going to kill him. Right? He just says, look, I'm going to destroy you, little man. I'm going to destroy you. I know your weak points. I'm bigger than you. I'm stronger than you. I'm going to destroy you. David's response is, no, you're not. In fact, his response and then his action that follows are different. Goliath's response was very similar to that gentleman's stance, right? Goliath's response was very similar to the guy that I met at the gym. He just says this, I'm going to destroy you. David's response is him on the ready, right? He's on his toes. He's ready. And this is where I want to draw your attention right here. David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. David wasn't waiting for Goliath. I think David knew that because God was with him, that there's no time but right now. There's no time but right now. So what did David do? David ran at him. Boom, boom, boom. Grabbed his sling. He ran towards Goliath. Goliath didn't even see it coming. I like to envision it, right? I'm a visual dude. I love epic movies, you know? But I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie 300. But there's this part in the movie 300 where the Spartan sees that there's like a rhino coming at him or something like that. And he runs and he slides on the dirt with his knees. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Right? And the rocks are kicking up slowly and he grabs a spear, right? And then by the time he gets up, he launches it or whatever and kills the crazy rhino or whatever it was. I envision that, like David running, right? I want you guys to just envision it because it's epic. He's running and he just slides in that slow motion of the rocks and he just grabs his sling and bam. History. You know what's interesting is that David grabbed 5 rocks and all he used was one. He grabbed 5 rocks and all he used is one. It's not interesting that he grabbed 5 and used one. What's interesting is that later on, the brothers of Goliath would try to do battle with them again, and all 4 of them died at the hands of David and his men. Anybody catching something here? He grabbed 5, he used one. His 4 brothers came at him later on in the Bible, and all 4 of them died at the hands of David and his men. Gentlemen, what am I saying? Am I saying, hey, go to your nearest Walmart and go buy a sling? Am I saying, go pick a fight with the biggest dude you can possibly meet? No. What I'm saying is this, is that you and I, whether we know it or not, have our own Goliaths in our life, amen? You and I perpetually have a Goliath that we're fighting in our own life. And sometimes the options that you see is either ignore the battle, run away from the battle, or just act like the battle doesn't exist. But the reality is that it does. And our Goliaths can manifest itself in so many different ways. The reality of the issue is that we believe in our faith of the things that we see and don't see. We believe in the visible and in the invisible realities. There's some visible Goliaths that we have in our life. And there's some invisible realities that we can't necessarily pinpoint in our life. You know what they are, because right now, as I even mentioned invisible Goliaths, you already thought of a situation, a thing, or something that like strikes fear in you. I'm going to disclose something with you guys, man, and I want you guys to be like 100 with me as I'm going to be 100 with you, all right? And the reality is this, what's said here stays here. Say that with me. What's said here stays here. And like, gentlemen, like, let's not be fooled in thinking that we don't have Goliaths. Because it's the minute that we think that we do not have a Goliath is that we've been conquered by Goliath. When I was growing up, man, you know, we had a big family. Our family was huge, you know, to standards, world standards, you know. And, you know, when I was younger, I had an uncle who just genuinely loved me, so I presume. And he always would be extra loving. And then he'd kind of like, you know, separate me from the pack a little bit. And he'd talk to me. He'd make, you know, crude jokes to see how I responded. He'd show me crude pictures. Started off with cartoons, and then it was just full-blown pornography. He wanted to see how I responded. And I was like baffled by it. I'd never seen stuff like that. Like, this is, you know? And then one day I remember he was like, hey, do you want to come help me do something? And I was like, sure. You know, I was always told to respect my elders. I was always told, to do what's right. I thought this was right. I went down to this basement. And the stuff that happened next threw my life into like a crazy whirlwind, you know? Let me explain something. I know my city very well. I know my city very well. Even still not being in my city, I can still envision my streets. I knew how to maneuver and get around my city. It's kind of a way of survival. It's like it's this instinctual thing. You need to know where you're going, you know? I know my city. So much so that I remember back in, I think it was 2005 or so, when I first met my wife. 2009. When I first met my wife, we were being separated. She was going on vacation, and I was staying back in Ohio, and she lived in Portland, Connecticut, and she was trying to get to Portland, and she came across 84, right after Middlebury, where that traffic jam just gets absolutely nuts, right? And she was stuck in this traffic, but she needed to get where she needed to get to. So she calls me up, and she's like, baby, I'm stuck on 84. This was before we had the smartphone apps to like Google anything. That Google app was based off of my memory of maps, you know what I mean? They're like, man, we want to be like Oscar. She called me up and she's like, baby, can you do me a favor? Can you MapQuest how to get around traffic? I'm like, MapQuest? You in my city, baby. I'll tell you where to go. Listen, what exit are you at? And she's like, well, I'm coming up to exit 18 or whatever. And I'm like, all right, well, listen, in about not even a quarter mile, you're going to see exit 19. You're going to take that exit. All right, at the exit, you're going to bang a left, right? You're going to cut through downtown Waterbury. You're going to find yourself at an intersection, and you're going to go ahead and take a right, bang a right, and keep going straight up East Main Street. You're going to ride East Main Street for about maybe 3 to 4 miles, if not a little bit more, all right? But you're not going to get off East Main Street until you cross over to Cheshire. In Cheshire, you're going to go ahead and bang another right, and you're going to get on the interstate on 84 that way, and it'll get you right on 691. You'll be golden. You'll be in Portland in no time. So she said, she did all her things, and she got there, and she called me back. She goes, how'd you know? I'm like, it's my city, boo. I know my city. You know, to this day, I can't find the house where the abuse happened. I put up a map of Waterbury, and I put a little pin where I assumed he lived, and I drew a little circle, try to find it within a 20-mile radius, and you know that I cannot find that stupid house. You know that I don't remember a lot of the memories that took place. I know the abuse happened at 7, and then it seemed like my life went fast forward, and before I knew it, I was 12. Like, absolutely insane. And it wasn't until later in life that I realized that your mind kind of shuts off. In times of trauma, it shuts off to defend you from going back to that place. My Goliath was this. This is the Goliath that no one ever saw. My Goliath was this abuse, not the abuser. It was the abuse, right? Because what ended up happening after the abuse is that one pornographic image that I saw became the seed that planted this virus within my mind. And before I knew it, I started finding solace in pornography. Like when I say it, it's weird, you know what I mean? But it's the reality of it. But like, it became an addiction, I used to work with a drug addict in Barbados. When I did mission work in Barbados, we had this place called Mama's House, and we brought in an addict who was hooked on crack. And I remember being in a room with him, and he'd be shaking and going in cold sweats and waking up from nightmares because he was fixating for the drug. And when I started to see him, I started to realize me, that I was no different than this man. The only difference is that he actually had the courage to seek help, and I just kept mine a secret. It set into action. That became my Goliath. The Goliath that was set before me was, you can't break me. I am a part of you. You are an abused individual who's addicted to pornography. How dare you get up on this stage and talk to people about Jesus? How dare you get up in any stage and talk to people about the dignity of humanity? How dare you talk about the beauty of humanity? How dare you talk about Jesus? How dare you talk about God? You can't. You're an abused porn addict. And Goliath would sit there and just pounce on me and pounce on me and pounce on me until one day, man, I realized who he was disrespecting. He was disrespecting the breath that laid within my lungs. That he was disrespecting the God who chose to dwell within me. That he wasn't making fun of me, but he was taunting the very God who created me for goodness. He was taunting the very God, saying that, look at your weak servant. Look at the stuff he went through. He can't serve you anymore. I got in his head. When I realized how absolutely glorious I was intended to be, the spiritual moment was epic. I remember grabbing something very similar to a slingshot. I remember getting down on my knee like David did to pick up his stones. And I went like this. I said, Goliath, tell me who you think I am again. Tell me who you presume me to be again. You're an abused. No, I am the Son of God. You're a porn addict. I'm a faithful man clinging to the life of God. You're weak. I'm stronger than you've ever been in your whole lifetime. And the more that I fought back with prayer, the more I fought back with the sacraments, the more I fought back with my faithfulness, the conversation with Goliath went from me looking here to looking there. My addiction took me most of my high school, most of my middle school, most of my childhood, so much so that my addiction almost led me to losing the wife that I have today. Before she was my wife, she was my girlfriend. And I remember when we were first introduced to one another and we first started talking, after a few weeks, man, I was super transparent with her. I said, I'm dealing with some things. And I don't want to disclose exactly what it is until it's time, but I'm dealing with some things. If we're going to date, you have to know that I'm dealing with these things. Her response was, I didn't fall in love or in love with your things. I fell in love with you. And later on in our relationship, as I was dealing with these things, I was clinging on to this rosary and, Lord, just free me. It became very evident what these things were. Because one day when we were out eating, she wanted to check the menu, wanted to see certain ingredients on the menu, so I passed over my phone, and she opened up my browser, and then she saw what those things were. Yo, I can still see her face. And you know what Goliath wants to do? Goliath wants to rise from the ashes of the defeat, right? And he wants to be like, focus on her face. You broke her heart. How dare you? Shut up, bro. I'm not done telling my story. I can see her face, heartbroken, and she goes, I told you that I would not be in love with you because of your things. But my heart right now, it's broke, all right? I gotta go, she says to me. And you have to be okay with that. I am. And my response to her is, you're gonna go. I promise you I'm not gonna stop fighting because you're gone. And she did. And I didn't stop her, because it'd be prideful of me to assume that I can mend a broken heart when my brokenness was even more at that time, you know? So I watched her go, and I clung on to another lady, our Blessed Mother, and I prayed, and I prayed, and I started seeing the manifestation of that addict that I lived with. That very time where he was shaking on the bed and resisting the urge to go back to drugs, I was shaking on the bed and resisting the urge to go back to pornography. And I don't want to talk about much because Mr. Mark Hart is going to be giving a talk on this later on. I just want to let you know, man, that your Goliath is not greater than our God, man. Your Goliath is not greater than that. I'm not saying that we're all at that level. You define what your Goliath is. But I'll tell you right now that addiction has been broken. Me and my girl have come together, and I looked her in the eye and dedicated my life to her. I laid down my life for her and will continue to lay my life down for her because that is my bride. My mission is to bring her to heaven. And if that means dying to self, then consider me dead. I'm no longer an addict. Why? Because I slayed my Goliath through the power of the God who dwells within me. I had you guys do your arms out like this. This glorious moment. This was a glorious moment because that was the moment where Jesus Christ outstretched his arms. I don't care what wrestler is throwing his hands up and trying to communicate to us how glorious he is. We are glorious because of the breath that dwells within our lungs. We are glorious because he died on the cross for us. So before there was any wrestler to ever do this, there was Christ who did it first. And if David was the mighty warrior and a warrior that we all can look to as an example to fight our Goliath, and Jesus is the fulfillment of David's covenant, then that makes Jesus the greatest warrior of all time. Because he didn't just conquer Goliath, he conquered death. Goliath was just an instrument of death, a tool of death. Jesus Christ, our warrior, conquered death. So if we want to be anything like the warrior that we were called to be, if you want to be anything like the glorious person that you were called to be and intended to be, then we need to look at our life through the life of Christ, the warrior that he is. I don't know your Goliath. I don't know whom, or what you're fighting. But I do know that who and what is never greater than our God. And y'all got to get hyped about that because that God dwells within you. Amen? That God dwells within you. Amen? Without that God, we are powerless. Without that breath, we do nothing. Philippians says that we do all things through the God who strengthens us. We couldn't do what we do if it weren't for God. I'm going to let you guys know I'm naturally an introvert. You may think that the stage comes easy, the mic comes easy, the speaking comes easy. No, it doesn't. It comes with the nauseous feeling, the knot in the stomach, the insecurities, the sitting back. Should I have said this? Should I have done that? There's a lot of stuff that happens up here. This doesn't come easy. This right here, this is battle. Nothing in life is going to come easy. This is what God's called me to do, so this is what I do. I could never read in public because I used to stutter and I had this little lisp that I still have occasionally, and it happens when I get nervous. But I didn't like speaking in public. It would always drive me nuts how insecure. This is God's call. Just like God is calling you guys to something greater. So who's willing to do battle with me right now? Who's willing to step up to their Goliath right now? This is no longer rhetorical. This is a question that you need to answer right now. Because these soldiers are with you. We're marching with you. They're marching with me. So who right now wants to slay their Goliath? Then I say you guys join me in prayer. I want you guys to join me in a prayer that's going to set this place ablaze. I want you to close your eyes for a second. I want you guys to just envision that Goliath. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's Goliath and his brothers, or maybe it's just one big giant Goliath. And if it's towering you, then let it tower you. But I want you to now look deep inside. And I want you to realize that there's something stronger than Goliath that dwells within you. There's something absolutely more glorious than that Goliath that dwells within you. And if you can see that, if you can come to terms with that, as cheesy as this may sound, keep your eyes closed, but if you can see that and acknowledge that, I genuinely want you to just throw your fist up in the air. Because that's what's going to lead you to your victory. And Goliath is nothing compared to that you've seen within you. That's what's going to lead you to victory in the battle. Brothers, I want you to stand with me right now and pray this song. And let this be your anthem. Let this be your warrior cry. Let this be that moment where you tap into that glorious light that you saw within you. That breath of God that dwells within you. That power that is mighty to save. That power that's going to strike down anything. Let this be your moment of victory right now. Let's pray.